And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud sponsor of the ABSA Africa Financial Markets Index 2025. 9 minutes after 6. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. So much to come in the next little while. Lucky Montana holding a press conference of his own. The former PRASA CEO railing against SARS, railing against the SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter. We'll focus on that for a few minutes. I mean, Montana has a very interesting history. His time at PRASA, the locomotives that were too tall. There really is quite a lot to the story. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go. We'll speak to Peter Louis Myburgh, who did so much to uncover what was really happening at PRASA at the time and what Lucky Montana's role in that was. And then the threat, the claim made by Montana that he's going to sue Edward Kieswetter, the SARS commissioner. We went through the law a little bit last week, but Professor Keith Engel, he's someone who knows a thing or two about tax law. I find the whole thing just astonishing, really. We'll talk about that in the next little while. Also tonight, Boxer's CEO, Marek Masojada, about their performance. They do seem to be taking a market share from somebody, not entirely sure where, but we'll ask that question because they certainly do seem to be growing tonight. Also this evening, looking at the situation regarding the Nobel Prize for Economics, certainly a very, very interesting decision by, I think it's the Royal Swedish Academy for of Sciences. They've given it to 3 people who studied creative destruction and innovation. And that is interesting because that is really what underpins everything we know about economics and sort of economic innovation and capitalism generally is what we would probably say. Also, the situation regarding the US and China. There's so much going on with that relationship, as you know. We'll talk about that before 7 o'clock this evening. Good to hear from you tonight on 011-883-0702, 021-446-0567, and of course voice notes this evening on 072-702-1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM, streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
I'm sure you've been watching the progress of weight loss drugs with some interest over the last sort of 5 years. So Aspen today confirming they've got approval for a drug called Mounjaro. The sort of unique selling point of it is that instead of having a jab or a pill every day, you would be able to do it once a week, and that'll help you lose weight. And there's the sort of boring stuff about exercising more and eating less. From time to time, I've noticed in the last year or so, I bumped into a few people, a couple of them who do live in other countries and they've been visiting here, people I know. And I've said to them, the sort of the way in which you tell someone they've lost weight, and you do it very politely. I found the best way to do it is to say, "Oh, you're looking well." And they kind of know what that means, and then they'll open the door to a conversation about it, or they'll keep it firmly closed and no one's sort of feelings are hurt. And they'll say, "Well, I've done this or I've done that," and I've walked away and I thought, well done them, they've lost some weight. And then I've worked out, oh wait, hold on. They've actually been taking one of these pills or having one of these jabs. And I mean, anything that makes you healthier has got to be the right thing. I have to say, I don't know if I'm completely sold myself. And I have 2 things. The one is they're quite new, and I realized that they wouldn't be selling them if they weren't safe. The second, so I'm kind of waiting for the data. The second is that, as I understand the current state of the art, once you take the pill, you have to keep taking the pill. If you don't keep taking the pill, the weight comes back on. So you can imagine running into, I don't know, maybe you can't pay for it anymore, or something else happens, or there's a supply issue, and suddenly the weight comes back, and everyone will know. Where are you? If someone offered you the pill at a price you could afford, if someone offered you the injection at a price you could afford, would you do it to lose weight? 011-883-0702, 021-446-0567, and of course voice notes on 072-702-1702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Another strong update from Boxers today. Like-for-like sales growth up 5.3%, turnover up 13.9% in the 6 months to the end of August. Marek Masojada is the CEO at Boxer. Marek, good evening. Good to have you back on The Money Show tonight. You're trading in a tough environment. We can all see the competition you're up against. You must be pleased that the momentum you have still seems to have some way to go.
Hi, Stephen. Good evening. And yes, thank you. We're very happy with the numbers we put out today, and in a tough environment, achieving 14% turnover figure. Happy that turnover through well, and yes, through to the end of the year.
Where are you seeing these big increases coming from? Is it food primarily? Is it a liquor perhaps? Is it another category maybe?
Stephen, yes, it is primarily driven by food and liquor, both in our existing stores and in our new estate. Our centre store has seen a good growth, and as we've opened more liquor stores, we have seen that contribution to our total turnover increasing.
Clearly people are coming to shop with you or shop at you from somewhere else. Are you taking business from a specific place? Could it be even the informal sector, for example?
Stephen, yes, I've been asked that question many times. It's difficult for us to say because we don't see the read of the overall market or the competitor market shares. But we believe that it's coming from both the formal and the informal sector, but probably primarily from the formal sector operating in the lower end.
I mean, you've got to compete very hard on price to make that work.
Absolutely. That's our mantra at Boxer, is never pay more than the Boxer price. So offering value to the customers, really remains the core of our business model.
Your internal selling price inflation over the 6 months was negative 0.7%. In other words, overall, if I've understood it correctly, your prices went down. It's amazing on one level, but I would imagine things can't go in that direction for very long.
Yes, we've seen this at play since late last year, that we've seen prices drop in some of the key commodity lines, but it's also a reflection of consumers buying on promotions, what goods we're offering at promotional price. A significant portion of our turnover is driven by our promotions, and it reflects the lower selling prices compared to the same items in the prior period.
There are some sectors, so appliance inflation in South Africa has been negative for a long time. Often things made of plastic will cost you less now than they did a year ago. Is that where you're seeing this negative inflation? I mean, I presume it's unlikely that food goes negative for very long.
Stephen, yes, the deflation is primarily in the food category. There are one or two categories where pricing is quite a lot lower than last year. We've seen exchange rate strengthening. We've seen the price of imported rice, for example, being a lot lower than it was a year ago. So certain key categories are driving that deflation.
Mm. You opened 25 new stores in the 6 months to the end of August. You're opening, I think it's another 35 during the current 6 months. Is it as simple as saying the more stores you have, the more profit you make? I mean, yours is very much a volume business, and I presume the number of stores really reflects that.
The new store openings do drive our overall volumes. I think Boxer is still underrepresented in many markets around South Africa, so it's always an opportunity to extend our footprint. But the key health of the business must always be measured by the performance in our like-for-like stores. And I think that's the pleasing part with our results, is that we've seen volume increases in our existing estates, and that's what drives the economies of scale. It reduces our overhead centralized cost percentage across the company, and that enables us to put more money back into value for the customer in terms of lower prices.
Are there particular provinces or particular areas you think are underserved that will have Boxer stores coming to them fairly soon? Are there particular areas you're concentrating on with new stores?
We did quite a lot of research in the lead up to our IPO in November last year, and there's some key provinces. Gauteng remains an area of opportunity. KwaZulu-Natal itself still offers opportunity, and the Western Cape is probably the province where we the least represented across our store format. So yes, we are focused on those three key provinces.
Obviously, you can't go on building stores forever, but there's probably quite a lot of scope. I mean, this process has some way to go.
Yes, I think that's the beauty of Boxer, that our superstore formats are still relatively small compared to other players in the market, and it offers us the opportunity to go into areas where we haven't been represented before. So we are, fully engaged with the property sector and opening more and more stores and established shopping centres where Box is coming in as a second or even a third anchor.
Marek Masojada, the CEO at Boxer, really do appreciate the time on the Money Show. Thank you.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
21 minutes after 6 the time. Well, a lot of developments today in the Lucky Montana scandal. So a threat from the former Pricer CEO, he's now an MK MP, that he is going to sue SARS and the Commissioner Edward Kieswetter for 50 million rand for making his tax affairs public. He also claims SARS is wrong to say he owes them 55 million rand. On Saturday, SARS held a press conference. They made public some details about Montana's tax affairs. They say he's lied about their dispute with him, and that allowed them to make public some aspects of his tax. Montana, you may recall, is found to have lied about a massive locomotive deal that saw Pricer spending billions of rand on locomotives that were too tall to work on our railway system. Charles de Wet's an executive at ENS in the tax practice. Charles, good evening. Good to talk to you again about this. Montana says he's going to sue Edward Kieswetter for 50 million rand. Kieswetter is the commissioner at SARS. I would presume that this would be quite a difficult case to make.
Good evening, Stephen, and I agree with that completely. I think it will be almost impossible to make. I mean, if you look at the record that SARS published on Saturday, there's a lot of information there. It seems as if due process has been followed right from the word go. I mean, it sort of looks like a typical audit and a typical letter of findings. So there has been, lots of correspondence. I think there are legitimate questions that SARS has asked in the circumstances. So I cannot believe that there's any prospect of success in terms of suing the commissioner for doing his job in the circumstances.
Can you actually even sue a commissioner in their personal capacity if they actually head an institution like SARS? I mean, I don't think it's ever happened before.
It certainly hasn't ever happened before, and I would expect that the commissioner is protected. I think that any SARS official is always open to something like this, and we have sort of seen people trying to do it in the past, but to sort of get beyond the corporate veil and get to the individual in the circumstance, I think is massively complicated.
Does it matter where Lucky Montana's money came from? I mean, we all remember the stories that were written, the testimony he had to give at the Zondo Commission, the Supreme Court of Appeal finding, if I recall, he misled the board of Pricer. Does that matter in the SARS findings about his income? Or for them, is it just about income and whether you declare it or not? And they sort of can define income through the use of a property, for example.
So, I mean, from their perspective, the source of it is irrelevant, because even if there are illegal activities, if you receive income, you should pay tax on it. And if you look at the process that they followed, I mean, it's obvious that they did an analysis of his bank account and looked at the receipts that came into his bank account and compared that to his tax returns. I mean, he did declare all his income from Pricer, so that was there, but there were a lot of other transactions that also went through there. I mean, that went through his bank account. There were property transactions. There were transactions for vehicles, and SARS does, as they do in these circumstances, said give us an explanation in terms of what the source of this income was. Where did it come from? How did you get a deposit like this? I mean, it seems as if there was very little cooperation during that process. There is correspondence backwards and forwards. The State Capture Commission sort of delayed SARS's process, and they granted extension for that. But in terms of all the responses that were sent for SARS, there were a lot of allegations in terms of it not being reasonable, but there was no actual proof put on the table in terms of this is what that amount relates to. That's where I got it from. It was a loan from so-and-so, and I paid it back on that particular date. So, SARS didn't look at the source of the income or where it could have come from. They said it seems as if you received this income, and, if you give us an explanation, we we'll reassess it, and if you don't, well, then we'll assume it to be income, and no explanation was ever provided.
Montana's other argument is that most of the amount, the 55 million, is actually penalties, and that's not the main amount. But isn't that what happens with SARS? You do get penalties, and they start to increase quite quickly.
Well, I mean, in terms of the law, so, SARS would assess you for an amount, and then there are different categories that apply. So they're automatically sort of late payment penalties, which are typically in the region of 10%. Then there are understatement penalties that can vary from 10% up to 200%. In these circumstances, the behavior in terms of cooperation with SARS was considered to be obstructive, and so they did levy 200% penalty. So, if the original tax number was 5 million, then the total tax bill is suddenly 15 million. So that would have had a big impact. And then there's interest on top of that amount. So that's how it gets to 55 million quite quickly. But those penalties are in the law so that, there's a deterrent from taxpayers not to declare their income. And SARS is entitled to levy them, which they do. There is a process that gets followed at SARS before they decide on a particular percentage. And you're also entitled to, provide reasons as to why a different category of behavior should apply, which could have the impact of reducing those understatement penalties. And these circumstances, that doesn't ever seem to have happened.
Charles Saville, really appreciate it. Thank you. Executive at ENS in the tax practice.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
28 after 6 here. I'm Barter's an investment analyst at the Old Mutual Investment Group. Sia, good evening. Another strong update from Boxer. To listen to their CEO, a lot more momentum to come.
For sure, Stephen. Good evening to everyone. Boxer is the people's grocer. They're known for keeping prices low, shelves full, and providing real value for money for everyday South Africans. So if you take a step back, Boxer was the crown jewel within the Pick n Pay stable and has since been spun out and is listed separately. And the most recent result was quite strong, so turnover growth of about 14%. And the key number to look for there is the like-for-like sales. So investors like to look at like-for-like sales because this is a great gauge for organic growth. So that's growth that excludes new store sales, and that was largely driven by volumes, which is really positive. And if you look at the earnings, profitability grew, but on a per share basis, that declined, and that was driven to the larger share count. But I think management have alluded to the importance of the absolute number in terms of profitability being quite important. And the great thing about this result is that since listing, this is the first time that they're paying a dividend. So that's quite positive. And of course, the balance sheet has strengthened since IPOing and has moved into a net cash position. So they've got lots of cash on the balance sheet. They've demonstrated strong growth, and they continue to deliver, which is positive.
Oil price has been edging lower over the last few days. There's sort of quite a lot going on. What for you are the main factors that could be leading to that?
Sure. I mean, notwithstanding the geopolitical tensions that we've seen ebb and flow over the last few weeks, as well as global growth concerns, I think what's really key with oil over the last few weeks specifically is its supply side story. So from an OPEC perspective, they've been unwinding production quotas in an effort to claw back market share in an environment where non-OPEC is also growing production. So this has been driven by Brazil, Guyana, as well as Canada. So we are in an environment where supply side growth is outpacing demand growth, and that's why we've seen the pressure on oil prices. But I think what's really important to contextualize for consumers is that this is really positive. So typically when Brent crude prices come down, you do see that impact at the pump. So petrol should be cheaper. And of course, this has implications for food prices as well. So this should curb food inflation as well. I guess the other side of the coin is that this is not necessarily good for particular companies. And in this instance, it wouldn't be good for a company like Sasol, for instance, where in general, lower oil prices as well as a stronger rand to USD is not necessarily good, and they typically tend to make less money under those conditions.
And Bank of America Global Research raising their price forecast for gold to $5,000 an ounce. We've also, of course, got Trump threatening China again.
For sure. I mean, U.S. equities today opened higher due to the de-escalation of U.S.-China trade tensions after Trump's tariff threats on Friday, but of course he's since walked those back. But despite this, we've seen that the concerns around global growth, particularly around policy within the U.S. and particularly relating to the shutdown, are still there, and which is why we've seen the gold price increase as well as gold miners. And today's move, we've seen gold price move beyond the 4,000 mark, which previously would have been inconceivable, right? So currently gold share prices are pricing at about $3,900 to about $4,300, depending on the share. And the real question now is whether investment demand can take gold beyond the 5,000 levels in the face of likely weakening jewelry demand. But I will say, if gold gets to 5,000, there is further upside within the gold stocks. And it is a scenario that we certainly can't rule out, although uncomfortable, and it would be most certainly unprecedented since 1971.
Sure. I mean, the difference between science fiction and fantasy, you get to fantasy, you start to get scared. Sierra Mbata, thank you, investment analyst at the Old Mutual Investment Group. 28 minutes now to 7.
702 with Stephen Grootes.
Email him on stephen@702.co.za.
Well, I haven't seen many people coming back to me and saying actually they'll be happy to take a pill to lose weight, and that's what they would do. I've been fascinated to see how the sort of weight loss drug industry is taking over. And it's become, and you can just imagine, of course, the idea of taking a pill or even having a sort of daily or weekly jab to lose weight is a license to print money. There are so many of us who could do with something like that. It is a fascinating dynamic to watch. The NHI and tax credits, and I see Dr. Nicholas Crisp he's the Director General in charge of the NHI in the National Health Department. He was in Parliament on Friday, and he was talking about how they are planning, it seems, if I've understood him correctly, I presume I have, they're going to cancel the tax credit that you get if you have medical aid. So when you make a contribution or a payment to medical aid, when you do that, you actually get a tax credit for it. As you know, you do your tax return every year, you'll see it all there. And that is the idea, as he describes it, is that would give about 34 billion rand back to government. That money would then be used to fund tax. To fund the NHI, rather. So it will be extra tax for government. You're absolutely, I think, as a government, allowed to use tax to sort of direct behavior. We do it all the time with sin taxes for tobacco and alcohol. So it would be quite hard to now say you can't use tax policy to have an impact on whether people use private health care. So I think that would be an argument in favor of doing it. An argument against doing it would be you're then going to have a much higher number of people using government healthcare, and obviously the sector is not ready. And I suppose the contention for that would be, or the response to that is that, well, all of the people in the private healthcare system, all of the nurses and doctors there would move into the government healthcare system. I'm not convinced that would happen. That's not how I see this playing out. I mean, as I see this playing out is legally court case after court case after court case, and politically, the ANC and the DA both keeping the issue for their voters, basically fighting until kingdom come, also known as South African politics.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud sponsor of the Absa Africa Financial Markets Index 2025.
13 minutes to 7 the time. Good to hear from you tonight on 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567. An announcement today by the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. It's awarding the Nobel Prize for Economics to 3 people who studied innovation and the forces of creative destruction. Joel Mokyr, Philippe Aghion, and Peter Howitt examined technology and how that leads to a better quality of life. Professor Adrian Saville, Professor of Economics and Finance at GIBS. Adrian, good evening. In a sense, I suppose, these 3 economists were really examining something fundamental to capitalism.
Yeah, they're looking for the source, the explainer of economic growth, and growth is the underpin of progress for societies as a collective. So that, begs a question: what is it that causes not just growth but sustained growth? And enter innovation, technology, which are able to double down on what you already have and produce not only more things, but
more things and new things differently, so that you have this cocktail of innovation that's technologically fed, and it translates into the well-being of a society.
Does that explain why some societies succeed and some don't? So if you look at, for example, societies with strong entrenched interests, the great example would probably be a place like North Korea or the Soviet Union, maybe China for a long time. That's why they didn't develop and the West did.
I think that's exactly, one of the central findings and arguments of this work. And in particular, what's especially valuable here is you've got an economic historian being awarded half of the prize. And this means that we're gathering up evidence rather than just ideas. And so what is it that explains the ability of societies to move things dynamically and sustainably? And these are exactly the underpins that are being referred to. So, for instance, what you need is a culture that actually values and rewards progress, that they see progress as good, as opposed to let's keep things the way they are. You necessarily require institutions that will not only facilitate innovation, but reward and protect innovation. And then you need a close arrangement between society and technology, between science and technology, which means that the society isn't producing knowledge or information for the sake of it, but rather that it has application. And that's facilitated by strong networks of knowledge, the exchange of ideas, and so on. And then I think one of the big findings out of this work, a really important observation, is that the society needs to not only tolerate experimentation, but it also needs to provide a platform that supports failure. Otherwise, there is no incentive to take risks that fall over, and then the result for you is an ultimate collapse. So you need this very delicate cocktail of tolerance for experimentation and support of failure.
I mean, there's no support for failure in South Africa. If you start a small business and it fails, all you're left with is debt, and you'll never get out of it.
And so not only then do you need the enabling institutions such as protecting intellectual property, these rich networks that exchange ideas and communication, and a good science and technology underpin, you also need a society that will support the person that fails. And there's a lovely, thought that comes through here is this is about protecting people rather than businesses. I think that's one of the real big ideas that pushes through.
The Academy made an interesting point today. They said that economic growth is not actually the story of human history. For most of human history, there's been economic stagnation. If you think about that for a second, up until, I suppose, the Industrial Revolution, that's probably true. And look at the advantages the Industrial Revolution gave the places where it started. So, the UK, bits of Belgium, sort of. And yet the area that we've lived through, so call it from the Second World War, has really been defined by enormous economic growth.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely on point there. Is for almost all of recorded history, human history, it's been a dance with basic subsistence, that per capita incomes approximately flatlined until somewhere around the mid-1700s. And it's from there where, there's early advances in agriculture and people are freed from the farm and you get surplus. But it's really from around the mid-1700s that you get this hockey sticking. And the progress that has been achieved from then to now, 3% per annum doesn't sound impressive until you compound it for 250 years. And the per capita incomes that we enjoy today, that you and me have, in our individual statuses, would rival that of royalty from 200 and 300 years ago.
There's been a perception, and I grew up with this, but I'm a natural optimist, that this growth would go on forever. And when I look at sort of how technology has changed in my lifetime, I still partially believe that. What I'm finding troubling with is that globalization and trade are such a big part of that progress that I want to go on forever. And it seems very threatened now that I do wonder in my darker moments if maybe that progress is threatened. Maybe that's not what we're going to see. We're going to see the darker science fiction movies rather than the happier ones.
No, Stephen, so two big ideas that come out of the work from these award winners is that in order to get these advantages, these gains from innovation, you need at least two things. The first is you need an exchange of ideas, and that requires openness, that we need to be able to share, to collaborate, to cooperate, to learn from others. That's the one requirement. But the second, in order for that to happen, is you actually need organizations, businesses, firms, policymakers, regulators, government, societies that are open to new ideas. So there's the blade here cuts both ways. One, you have to be pushing these ideas through exchange and sharing, and then there needs to be a receptiveness.
Professor Adrian Saville, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Professor of Economics and Finance at GIBS. 6 minutes to 7 the time. Well, I'm fairly certain the Royal Academy of Sciences did not plan it this way, but while they were celebrating economic growth and creative destruction, markets were convulsing over the latest threat to global trade from the US President Donald Trump. He posted on Friday he was going to apply tariffs of 100% on Chinese goods in response to their decision to limit the export to the US of rare earths. Dr. Martin Davis is an expert on China, also recently appointed by the Mining Indaba as chair of the Industrial Policy Group. Martin, good evening. Good to talk to you again. I thought there were ongoing negotiations between the US and China around trade. Did Beijing sort of shoot first here with new controls on rare earths? Martin Davis, I don't know if you're with us tonight. There you are. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Stephen. Yeah. Ongoing negotiations, it seems, is a meeting pending end of this month between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump at the APEC summit in Korea. And you'll notice that Donald Trump threatened this 100% additional tariff on Chinese imports into the US starting November 1st. So he's bought himself a couple of days, and let's see if the Chinese will back down before that date. And this meeting does go ahead. I mean, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce has said, look, has come out and said publicly, we don't want a trade war, but we don't fear it either. So it's certainly increased brinkmanship on both sides, and I think just the uncertainty of how this is going to play out has certainly rocked the markets in recent days.
From what I understand, rare earths is the kind of biggest weapon that China really has against the US. They wouldn't be using this weapon if they didn't want to. They would have gamed this out, right?
Yeah, look, it seems that there's a what you've seen in recent times, and the ante has been upped in recent months. The US side has been purchasing roughly $1 billion reportedly of rare earths and stockpiling in the event of supply chain sort of restrictions coming out of China. Apparently they're looking to buy $500 million worth of cobalt, another $100 million of tantalum. And this is a sort of, because of China's dominance of the entire sort of value supply chain of all things rare earths. But the bigger picture here is, of course, that poses a threat to Western industry. And we see the same out of Europe. We see the same in the US now. But it really begs a question, a lot of the supply on the supply side, a lot of this comes from our part of the world. I think Zambia, particularly the DRC. And it really talks about, this may be another conversation, South Africa's strategic interests in the region, where China's been a player for the last 25 years, effectively. The US is increasingly, because of rare earths and critical minerals, has become far more assertive in the last 2 to 3 years or so. And ultimately, we arguably are a bit of a spectator to this process taking place. We always talk about how countries in Africa should leverage their resources. Well, I'm not seeing it happening. And really, I think the conversation for us is an introspection, saying that, well, we were spectators while this great game of critical minerals has been playing out. Hence, now we see downstream, new material sciences, battery technology, new energy vehicles, and the like. And we're still talking about sort of Industry 1.0. So it really talks to how third countries like ourselves. I mean, China, the US account for roughly, 44%, I think, of global GDP entirely. It's almost half, two countries. How do third countries like ourselves with direct or indirect, certainly specific regional interests respond to this? And I just really haven't seen that in recent times.
I mean, I would presume with the US and China, I would like to think that rationality comes into play and it's rational for them to strike a trade deal. But there's so much politics here, and that's really what's roiling markets. That's what they're so worried about.
The interests are, Stephen, are irreconcilable. This is two great powers, two geopolitical, geoeconomic powers, whose economies have been interdependent, are increasingly starting to diverge and become sort of separate entities effectively, especially on the Chinese side. And I've always said that China's got almost whatever leading companies you see, especially on the tech side, you see in the West, you see mirror companies in China doing pretty much the same thing. China is ahead by far on all things AI. It accounts for roughly 1/3, maybe 30% roughly, of global manufacturing value add. And China's besides innovation and all of these nice things, which you were just talking to Adrian about, it really is an economy that price is being driven and competitiveness is being determined by overcapacity, and that overcapacity is now being exported, which is massively it started on textile garments, it went to toys, it's been through the entire value chain. It's moved up now to the peak of the value chain in China, that this excess capacity is exported, and countries of aspirant with existing industries, think Germany, or countries with aspirational industrial strategies are all being, how should we say, under significant pressure, being hollowed out, or in some cases decimated by this competition coming out of China. The US is seeking to respond. How to do that in very creative ways. Donald Trump is trying. Whether it'll work out, there was an article in the Financial Times, I think yesterday, Martin Wolf, very critical of it. Time will tell, but something I'm afraid countries need to better understand the forces of competition coming out of China, and in most cases they don't.
Dr. Martin Davis, as you can hear, an expert on China. Thank you very much indeed. It's 7:00.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud sponsor of the ABSA Africa Financial Markets Index 2025.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
8 minutes after 7. Good evening. Plenty to come in the next hour. We'll speak to Craig Comrie. He's the principal officer of the ProfMed Medical Scheme. Also, of course, one of the people who's opposed to the NHI, or as I understand it. We'll be talking about that in a moment. Does look like the health department wants to change the way that there's a tax credit scheme for medical aids. And of course, this is all really about the NHI. It's such a big issue, and there's so many arguments around it. Bob Stark is the co-author of the book, The Life Cycle of a CEO. Really has some interesting insights into the whole thing. We'll hear from him in a few moments. And Michelle McConnell, the co-founder of Mo's Crib, she gave up a really strong academic career, was doing really interesting things. She was talking about, she was studying international law, and then decided to actually work with her sister and found Mo's Crib. Has done exceptionally well. Really looking forward to that conversation. She's coming in, actually. Take your calls as well on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and your voice notes tonight on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
On the next Money Show, personal finance expert and co-founder of Galileo Capital, Warren Ingram, will talk to us about the right time to cancel your life assurance. On the Green Economy feature, Advocate Anne-Marie van der Merwe, the executive chair of Fluid Rock Governance Group, sharing some advice about turning ESG from compliance to a competitive edge. Dr. Rotendo Windingwi, the founding director at Tribe Africa Advisory, he'll have the latest business news from around the continent. All of that and more on the next Money Show.
WhatsApp Stephen
On 072
702
1702.
Well, plenty, of course. We've been talking tonight about Nobel Prizes for economics. We'll talk in a second again about medical aid. We've been talking as well about Lucky Montana. Plenty are coming up on the show.
Hi, Stephen. SARS already don't give you full credit on the amount you spent on your medical out of your own pocket. I'm a pensioner and I'm feeling that quite badly lately. They have a formula and they only give you credit for X amount. So they are already doing that. My expenses are far higher than what they accept. And if they had to do that, I think there's going to be big problems if they take it any further. Thank you. Nicholas, Florida.
Oh, Nicholas, thank you for that WhatsApp voice note. And this comes after those comments by the Deputy Director General for the NHI and the Health Department, Dr. Nicholas Crisp, in Parliament on Friday. He says they're working with the department to impose thresholds for medical aid tax credits. The idea, I suppose, is that while you might receive a tax credit for your contributions, your payments to medical aid, over time, the credits would be removed to help pay for the NHI. Craig Comrie is the Principal Officer of the ProfMed Medical Scheme. Craig, good evening. Crisp says these credits come to around 34 billion rand a year. If government cancelled those credits, people would no longer afford medical aid, but that money would go to funding the state healthcare system. Do you believe it would work in that way?
No, not at all, but it will have an impact on the affordability of individuals who actually enjoy it's a very limited tax rebate. It's about 364 rand for an adult dependent a month. And so it's actually a very small amount when you compare it to the size of medical schemes. But there's no doubt that people that will hurt most are those in the middle and lower income brackets, of which that group makes up 67% of medical schemes. So when he talks about it's only going to impact the higher earners, I don't know how you're going to differentiate the higher earners, because as your caller early on the voice note actually indicated, those with disabilities and pensioners are the ones that tend to also benefit from the additional medical tax credit that's available. So it really is something that should be carefully unpacked, and I see Dr. Crisp's point is that he is engaging Treasury on how this may work and how it may be affected. But like many things on NHI, the biggest concern is that you cannot finance what is said to be R1 trillion a year NHI fund by taking 34 billion rand from those who actually spend money on taking care of themselves.
Okay, I'm going to come to that argument. The argument against you would be, on the one side, you're saying the medical aid tax credit actually isn't very much money for the people who are paying towards medical aid. And on the other side, you're saying don't remove it because that would mean they can't pay for it. I don't know if you can have it both ways.
Well, there is a significant portion of that medical tax credit. You're probably talking about 70 or 80% of the 34 billion that actually look after and are directed at those in the middle income market. So I think what you have to do is concern yourself that what you're doing, even if you get 20 billion from there, you're still trying to move another 8, or you're still trying to find another 700 billion rand a year from somewhere else.
Okay. It would seem to me that it is rational for government to use tax policy for certain aims that are not just about money. So the fact that government introduces deliberate tax policy to help people stop smoking or to try and force them to stop smoking has generally been accepted. Is it really rational for government to have a tax credit for medical aid when only richer people get it? The argument would go for people who propose the NHI that is basically helping richer people to pay less tax.
I think the other thing that it's doing is it's actually helping those that can afford to pay for their own medical cover to pay for it and remove any obligation by the state to fund it. So let's just look at it from a medical scheme reporting perspective. So if you go to the 2024 Council for Medical Schemes report, it indicates that the amount paid by medical schemes in terms of claims, sits on in and around 280 billion rand a year. Now, that's after tax money. So that's people out of their own, after paying all the tax they should be, going and purchasing medical cover and not going to the state for the cover that they, in fact, are also entitled to. So the point is really important to understand that medical schemes actually assist the state, not having to pay the 270 billion rand out of their own coffers, but can focus the health budget as it stands on those that are destitute and those that actually can't afford funding private medical scheme cover.
But again, to sort of bring the argument back, wouldn't that be 274 billion rand in the private healthcare system? It would probably cost a lot less for almost every procedure if government were to do it. And I'm sure that must be the case.
It's actually quite difficult to determine that. You'd have to actually see what it would cost in government. I mean, I've worked on medical schemes who actually have some of their benefits that are state benefits. So medical scheme members are entitled to go and obtain services from the state, and medical schemes would actually pay the state. That's how it worked many years ago. What has happened with the poor way that the state facilities and the public facilities have been run, fewer and fewer of the medical scheme members are willing to do that because of the quality concerns. In fact, the length of stay or the ability to access doctors is problematic, and partially because of management and poor efficiencies within the state, and partially it is underfunding. But we have seen corruption also impact the ability to actually provide proper services as well. So what we really need to look for is something that moves medical schemes back into state facilities where they can and pay for it. And in that way, supplement the services and improve the services that are available in state. But that might be already a suggestion made by one or two political parties that are currently targeting parliamentarians and others. And so the question is, if it was before tax money or non-discretionary spends, that might have made sense. But this is people out of their own paying after tax, actually paying for their own medical scheme cover. Perhaps it's similar to paying for your own security cover and insurance cover without having to try rely on the state to do that. So what we also don't see is that tax rates in South Africa are significant. We have amongst the highest tax rates in the world here in South Africa for those that are earning. So at 45% for those that earn, they pay their shares. But it is an issue that specifically in a scheme like ours in ProfMed, we've seen professionals move away from the country because the value proposition here and the tax rate and what you get for what you pay in terms of taxes just doesn't compete.
I realize I've lost count of the number of court cases brought against the NHI. I think it was 5 last time I checked. You probably know better than I do, Craig.
There are 8 at the moment.
8, okay. Would this be something you would go to court over if government were to remove the tax credit? Obviously, it would have an impact on medical aids, and I'm sure would give them standing to do it.
It would actually have to go through quite a significant process with Treasury. And so the one missing voice that we've continuously missed in the whole NHI debate is the Treasury voice. So it's almost like you can build a home, give everybody a room of their own, but nobody ever talks about what it will cost and where the money will come from. So Treasury is that voice, and usually a voice of sanity, and we're hoping that prevails in the conversation. So we'll see where it goes and where necessary, whether it be open conversations and consultations that we'd invite, or whether it would be that we have to land up in court. We certainly will protect the interests of medical scheme members.
Craig Comrie, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. Principal Officer of the ProfMed Medical Scheme, 19 after 7.
The Money Show.
Business Books.
Well, of course, how much of a focus there is on what makes an effective CEO, here and in so many countries. So many of our guests are CEOs, and so often people do sort of align their view of a company with their view of a CEO. A fascinating book out about this. It's called Life Cycle of a CEO. Bob Stark is one of the co-authors. He's also the CEO performance partner and advisor at Spencer Stewart. Bob, good evening to you. I really do appreciate the time, and thank you. It's a question you must be asked wherever you go, and I apologize if you're immediately bored with the question. But what makes a CEO better than good? What makes a CEO great compared to the others?
It's a very good question to start with, Stephen. I think, part of what our research shows is that it's less about personality or other particular qualities and skills, and it's more about the ability to evolve with the role. And that's really the focus of our book, is to help people understand, help CEOs in particular and those that support them understand that the job is about evolving in the job. And we talk about the different stages that CEOs go through and how it's necessary to be a different leader and evolve with the job over time.
So, in a way, that's about the ability to grow. I often think as I go through life, the greatest challenge, and I see people around me of my generation and older, is some people can change as the demands change, and some people find that quite difficult.
Absolutely, that's right. It's all about recognizing the circumstances that you're in and adapting to those, and that is really the number one job of a CEO.
Is there a particular moment or phase in a CEO's sort of journey or time in the job that is the toughest? I'm sure that most CEOs are probably the most nervous in two cases. One is when they kind of know they're in trouble in the boarders meeting. And the first, though, is probably the first or second or third day on the job.
That's right. So it's an interesting question you ask, because I think that the way CEOs experience the job is that first day, the first month are really disorienting. And you've probably heard many CEOs talk about the loneliness, the pressure they feel, this weight of responsibility that they feel, that they just, no matter how many people tell them before they get the job, they can't fully appreciate it until they feel it themselves. I think what's interesting, though, is that, and I agree with you that when a CEO is in trouble, that can be a very uncomfortable place to be in. I think that what is interesting, though, that getting back to your question, is that we could look at it another way, and that is there are times in a CEO's tenure when they're not aware that they're not performing in the way that they should, because the markets might be rewarding them for their performance, and the board may not actually see what's going on. And maybe missing the opportunities to make those kinds of transformative changes that we talked about earlier, making those adaptations that are required.
It's often about what you miss, what you didn't know. I hate to use this phrase, but it's so important. What you didn't know, you didn't know.
Yes.
When you get into that top job, is there a particular sort of mind shift or a particular change in outlook that you need to make? Is there a particular kind of way? Someone was describing to me today, they used a wonderful phrase a few weeks ago in a conversation, that in some jobs you need to have a balcony view rather than a kind of, down with everybody else view.
Yes, well, I use that metaphor myself frequently, is that CEOs need to be careful not to spend too much time on the dance floor. And they need to get up in the balcony. So absolutely, I love that expression. Yeah, I think so there are many things that are unique to the CEO job. One of them is that, and a way to think about this is what are the things that only the CEO can do? And only the CEO can really think long, see the big picture. And another thing about the CEO, in particular in public companies, is that the CEO, we sometimes talk about the hourglass concept. The CEO controls the flow of information from inside the company to outside into the board, and from outside back into the company. So they're the pinch point in the hourglass in terms of information flow. And just a third thing that's really unique about the CEO job is the breadth of the job. And so most CEOs, when they're new to the job, feel this capacity challenge. That is, they've got a job that's broader than ever before, plus they have a bunch of stakeholders they didn't have to deal with before, All of that is new, and the demands on their time are enormous, which ties right back to being on the dance floor instead of being on the balcony. So you have to manage your time ruthlessly so you can get up there.
A lot of being a CEO is about technical skill. I mean, there's a reason why historically in South Africa we use the phrase a chartered accountant, but so many of the people who become CEOs have a particular set of qualifications. That's why people study those qualifications when they come out of school, is they want to be a CEO. But there are so many other things that make up a good CEO. A big part of it is emotional intelligence and resilience. To come back from defeat, to put a brave face on defeat sometimes is very important. Sometimes it's about knowing actually how to get the most out of a leadership team, which requires maybe a completely different set of skills and may almost be required more than it was, say, 20 years ago, might be more important.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we sometimes think about, to have a simplifying frame for this, we sometimes think about experience. And so these are the things that are the easiest to measure because you can look at what a person has actually done. Capability, and I think that's what you're getting at with leadership skills, being able to engage hearts and minds to engender followership. But there are many more on that list, leadership skills. And then we talk about capacity as a third category. And that's where we would put innate abilities like emotional intelligence and the ability to remain objective about and seek disconfirming information to try to make sure that you're actually truly understanding situations and not letting your biases overrun you. And then finally, just elements of character. And we see this all the time all around the world when leaders don't have it and the cost that has.
I mean, and yet, of course, there are examples that go against this. I mean, I've never met Elon Musk, but I wouldn't suggest that he has a very high emotional intelligence.
Yeah, that's probably right. I think that those cases, it's really interesting that those cases of the sort of hardcore CEO and the founder mindset. I think it's called. I'm blanking on the name that an author recently wrote about. But this mindset of the founder that is always on, hard charging, pushes and forces the team, leads with fear. I think that only applies in very limited situations, and we see very little of that in more mature companies and public companies.
Bob Stark, so much to talk about with you. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate the time. Life cycle of a CEO, and Bob Stark is the CEO Performance Partner and Advisor at Spencer Stewart.
The Money Show. How I make my money.
23 minutes to 8 the time. So imagine starting a career, a successful academic career. Now you'd think, which academic career could make me money? It's in law. And then you decide, actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to work in a business that I suppose came to be known for more than anything else by an origami swan. On the other hand, your sister's working in it, so maybe it's a good idea. This is what happened to Michelle McConnell. She and her sister Mo formed a company called Mo's Crib. Michelle, good evening. Thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Good evening, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you had an academic career in international law. In fact, you were studying in, tell me, Switzerland?
Yes, Switzerland, the University of
Bern. Okay, so you weren't bad at it. You knew a thing or two. They were happy to have you.
Yeah, 100%. It actually, the base of my academic career started in agriculture. So I did agriculture economics at the University of Pretoria, and then I did my honors there. And then I went on to do my master's in international trade law and economics. So I always thought that's where my career is going to take me, working at the WTO, and then only for it to take a different trajectory, which I'm not too mad about.
So how did that happen? Okay, how did the origami swan suddenly become so important?
That's a very interesting question because I remember my sister was living in London. So when she completed her matric, she went straight to London to live there. And she was living with a Japanese roommate who was making origami, of course. It's a Japanese art form of folding paper. And so she picked up that skill. And, she's always been very, skillful when she was young.
She's sitting next to you, so just be careful what you say.
So she was actually making like rugs from plastic. And so it was very easy for her to pick up that skill. And she came back to South Africa and she was trying to find a market to sell these origami swans. But I think the market was not really quite understanding the swans. And I think like she had been doing it for 10 years at the time. I invited her to go to a market with me called Newsmakers now. And at the time when we went to the market, we were just going to support a friend of mine who was exhibiting at that particular market. And, we just went there just for a casual Sunday to just have fun. And when we got there, she saw somebody actually selling roses made from newspaper. And she thought, well, I mean, it's roses, it's not functional. Clearly my origami swans could actually, be better because of the origami swan is actually functional. So it's a whole sculpture. You can actually use it to put, stuff in it. And fast forward to that evening, she wrote to the, owners of the market and tell them about her swan. And a year later, we're there. And Stephen, it's such a funny story because when we were driving there, we did not even know the price of the swan. Okay, so we were like 5 minutes from the venue. It's like, actually, how much are we selling this for? And we're like, okay, $250. We're like, okay, that sounds good. And we completely underpriced it. So, I guess the price also helped us, but also it was a very good product. It was environmentally friendly. It was very different to the eye. It's something that South Africans have never seen before. I mean, you may be familiar with origami, but not the swan sculpture. And so what we thought was just going to be, a market just selling for fun, because at the time we were working full time. So I was an agricultural economist working at Grain SA. Mo was working at Nestle in the HR space. And so we were just doing this for fun. And it became a phenomenon. I was shocked. I was like, these papers, we pass them, we sweep them at home. And here it is, people are really valuing this. And I don't think it was just the price that made it, such a phenomenon. But I think, just the way that we sold it, the way that it was just so different. And because it was just like, I think a lot of what people were saying at the time, I mean, this was 2016. Environmentally friendly was the word,
Yeah.
And then we stuck onto that. We're like, okay, this is where the market is going. And if we are going to introduce another product, it certainly has to have these particular characteristics, especially because I think that we are also very entrepreneurial. So yes, we had our full-time jobs, but I think deep down inside, we knew we wanted to have our own businesses. And it was because we grew up in a home that our dad was an entrepreneur. Even though our mom was a nurse, she was also, doing her side hustles on the side. And so we knew that wherever the road takes us, we would really like to see ourselves as entrepreneurs. And we didn't really see a big window or opportunity there. We thought, okay, this is fun. And then,
so
something.
Sometimes, a company in that position will have one product that really sells. It's like, sometimes people have a novel. Writing the second one is hard.
Yes.
Hardest thing.
Yes.
So what was your second product? And I presume it couldn't just be an origami duck. It had to be something else.
It had to be something else. And we landed on a PVC basket. And why PVC? People always ask us. PVC is one of the least recycled plastics in the world. When you go to PVC manufacturers, any PVC manufacturers, and you go to see their backyard, they've got piles of PVC that are gathering dust and have been there for years.
And they'll gather dust for another 1,000 years.
Exactly. Well, thank God most group is here because we get to clear all of that up. And so we noticed that, well, this is definitely what we can also introduce. First of all, it's environmentally friendly, it's recycled, it's functional, it's steady. It just really just ticks the boxes, just like how the origami swan did. And at the time, it was just a laundry basket that we introduced. And we came across this with actually artisans making it on the side of the road. And we found a way to actually make it better and enhance it. And those artisans are still working with us today. And we've managed to not just do the laundry basket, but also the planter version. Right now, looking into doing outdoor furniture. So the introduction of that came a year later. Of us being at the market, and we sold both the origami swan and the PVC laundry basket, which sold super well, and I think it was very easy for us to sell it. We collect the PVC pipes from construction sites, landfills, the PVC manufacturers. It's steady, it's water resistant, indoor, outdoor friendly, and we don't dye it. So what you see is what you get. Even the PVC laundry basket, you can actually see some of the markings on that actually laundry basket. So it really just makes it very beautiful. And so yes, it was a second chapter, but I must tell you, it was actually quite easy for us to sell it. We were very scared, wondering if it was going to be received the same way. But once again, this was something different, and I think this is the hallmark for most crib, because we really bring things that are very different, things that are very eclectic. So, yeah.
So you have a couple of products, and now you need to actually have more, and then you have to sort of find things that you can make. So it's the scaling up moment of a small business. Now you're going from, a sort of sister company to something bigger. That must have been quite difficult. And at the same time, there's a bit of a rush. It's very exciting, but there must have been quite a lot of pressure.
It was a lot of pressure, especially because the second time when we then had to then do the business full time, we then had to come up with new products. And this time, we're not just doing it for fun. We did not have our full-time jobs. We left the comfortable jobs.
Yeah.
Whatever we introduced had to work, okay, because we needed this to survive. Personally and to also grow the business. And we had very big vision for the business. Now, the beautiful thing about our journey is that things just fell into place, especially in the beginning, because whenever we reached out to the retailers, like, you know, we trade with Woolworths, Mr. Price Home, At Home. And so at the time we reached out to Woolworths and they said, we love the PVC. We've got very small section at Homes, but we think we want to have the grass. And that is how we then, you know, went on to do grass. And it didn't just stop at, because the base grass that we were using was Ilala palm leaves. And we didn't just stop there. We then traveled across Africa to find different types of grass, making sure that whatever products that we bring at Moscrip are environmentally non-invasive. And so we had to just find different types of grass. We worked with sisal, elephant grass, you know, different types of grass, and banana, like a whole bark of a banana tree. We actually use that to make, you know, baskets. And so following that, we then were able to introduce new products just from one customer really just having a concept saying, well, I would like grass. And we thought, okay, we're not just going to stop at the PVC. Let's do grass. You know, it can be a complementary product in our whole assortment.
When you were at that phase, and so you've got some money, obviously, you know, you'd both been working, but then you would, I presume, have some money that you'd got out of the company through sales. Did you have to borrow money to take it to the next step? Because I always think that must be the scariest thing, you know, in Cyril's economy, to actually sort of borrow money and not be sure if you're going to be able to pay it back.
Stephen, I think it's even more scary when you don't think you needed the money. Mo and I did not think we needed money to grow the business. We knew nothing about investment. We knew nothing about venture, you know, or equity investment. You know, we knew nothing. Like literally, we thought that the money that we had was going to be enough to take us to the next level. I remember when we came home, we took our last money to, and by saying come home, because we lived in Switzerland for a while, and then we moved back home to pursue the business full time, and we took a lot of, I think about 50% of the money to go to do a trade show in New York called New York Now, hoping we're going to get a whole lot of wholesale orders from your IKEA, etc. And we left with 0 orders. And that was quite devastating. But what we took with us was an award that we won. We actually won the best product of the market. And here we were competing with basket makers from Asia. I mean, that's a very big market. And so that was like a particular way to come back to South Africa and say, well, you want to have this basket in your stores. And I think that's what really helped us in a way. But we really struggled a lot, having to, you know, go from having a very comfortable job to now having to sustain your personal life and also grow the business, and you know nothing about investment and funding. And while we were at that particular trade show, that we actually found other makers who were actually helped by government to actually come and exhibit. We did not even know that program existed. And so that just goes to show how much we just knew, like how little we knew. And so we survived on friends for a very long time until the business got to, I guess, got to grow way faster than the cash flow, to a point where we really just had to start Googling and searching, and we ended up finding, you know, learning a bit more about funding. And so for a very long time, we were very, very self-funded. I mean, I think from the time that we started the business, I think for 3 years we were self-funded, and only later on we ended up being able to get, you know, equity investment. And that really helped us a lot, you know, in our business. But yeah, I think friends and family really helped us a lot, you know, in the beginning stages, even as customers.
So I often think, you know, one of the things about running a business is people always say you never sleep at night if it's your own business, because you've got other people to look after, and you never, you know, it's not like, I mean, I get a salary for doing this kind of thing. Do you sleep at night, or does it still keep you awake? I mean, it's quite a difficult question to answer in a way.
We do now. You learn a lot, you know. I always say that we're not building the business, the business is building us. Yeah. Because when we went into business, what made sense for us is that, you know, you are grinding all the time. I remember, I mean, Mo and I were the drivers. I mean, she was definitely the pickup truck driver. She was the driver. She would collect all these pipes and, you know, work with the artisans and go and collect, like looking for galvanized wire in landfills. You know, it was crazy. And this is while we are actually doing big productions for our retailers that we work with. And we wore many hats in the business. And it got to a point where we really understood that we had to have our weekends. You know, we had to have rest in order for us to be able to continue with the business. And we spoke and we said, to what end? You know, you're going to work so hard and push yourself to what end?
You need a life.
We need a life, and more than needing a life, you need to also protect your health. You want to make sure that your business is able to actually have you around for as long as possible. And so it became important for us to be able to rest, but also to be able to employ people. So now you had, support staff that's able to come into the business and do the other important bits. And I think also understanding that this is definitely not my strength. So for a long time, we were, having to look at the finances ourselves. We both do not like finance at all. And so it's one of the things that we decided, no, we can definitely have someone, we can delegate this particular thing. And so because we've learned to delegate, and I think another thing that even if you've delegated, you can have sleepless nights because you don't have salaries. There are some months where you really have to really scramble for salaries. You are even lost. You don't even think about your salary. You think about your team members, and you cannot compromise when it comes to them. And we've learned that even in those moments, you need your sleep because a solution will come. When you are in business, you are put in business to be able to solve problems, and you need to trust that more than anything. And so, you have to get to a point where you don't panic anymore. You cannot run a business on panic. You have to know that you are a problem solver, and you move like that.
It's a great motto. You can't run a business on panic. We should have that on the Money Show. Michelle Makone is the co-founder of Mo's Crib. She's with us until 8 o'clock. Another 10 minutes.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud sponsor of the Absa Africa Financial Markets Index 2025.
The Money Show. How I make my money.
8 minutes to 8. Michelle Makone is the co-founder of Mo's Crib. They make all sorts of things that you want to have around them, from recycled material. Michelle, you supply now to people outside the country. And I mean, you talk about going and winning an award at this trade show, but not actually selling anything.
Yes.
How did you go from that position to actually having, being able to actually have customers outside the country? Because that's what everybody wants, is the Holy Grail, is that.
Absolutely. And I think from my stories, I mentioned that when we went into the business full time, one of the first things that we did was went to the trade show internationally. And I think it was very clear from the beginning that we wanted to build an international company and not just one that trades locally. And so, we took advantage of the COVID period. It was a quiet time. People were working from home, and I think it was just less stressful for the people.
Yeah.
And that's when we started emailing all the retailers. We emailed many, many retailers internationally. And what the first one that responded was Crate and Barrel, who's still an active customer. In fact, all our customers that we started with in the beginning are still active customers today. And they responded, positively. And a year later, we started supplying them. That was in 2021. We did our first export, project, and that was quite exciting. We sent our first 2 containers, and later on, managed to send many more. And a year later, we then started trading with Target, one of the largest retailers in the world.
Target's huge. I mean,
Target
when I read that,
massive.
I was amazed. Yeah.
Yes, Target is very, very big. And we still work with them today.
Was it difficult to kind of match what they wanted in terms of just scale? I mean, they must have wanted a lot more than you'd ever, in terms of volume, than you'd ever supplied before.
Yes, we currently don't even meet the volume that they're looking for. They're looking for 8,000 SKUs per month. That's just 8,000 of one item. So if you've got
What's a SKU?
A SKU would be like a product. So for instance, if you've got medium, small, large, that's 3 SKUs because you've got a smaller, medium, and a large. And so, we're still not at that level yet, but, we were able to supply, the volumes that we can. And we didn't just stop there. Now we're working with CB2. We started trading with them this year. And we've got our site on Lowe's, which is another international retailer. So yeah, we've managed to actually grow from not winning, from not being able to sell any at the trade show to now working with all of these retailers.
So someone who's an agricultural economist, if only there was someone who was an agricultural economist and an expert on international law in the studio now, because if there was, I would ask them, Michelle, have you been affected by the US tariffs? I mean, you're selling to Target.
No, we have not.
You haven't?
And
did you get an exemption along with critical minerals?
Well, I mean, of course, principally we have been because of, the R tariffs at the moment when we used to actually benefit from the AGOA agreement. But what you need to understand within our industry is that we are actually trading in an industry that had always been facing tariffs.
Yes.
So this is a product that internationally, they actually import a lot of it from Asia. Asia has always faced tariffs when it comes to this particular product. And so it's something that's not necessarily of material value for the buyers that we work with. And I think what they're looking for, in fact, it's never actually been a conversation. And even right now, just a week or 2 weeks ago, we're having another conversation about future orders that they want to place. And once again, tariffs is not a major topic. I think when it comes to price competitiveness,
Just
it
too
will
cheap.
obviously affect it. Yes, and it will it will affect it, but it's something that they're able to absorb. And I think from both ends, we'll have to be able to find a way to absorb, the tariffs. But it's not of material value at the moment, to be totally honest. And I think we're very fortunate in that sense. Of course, in other industries, I can imagine it is. But in ours, it really is not.
And you're not selling things for 250 Rand anymore.
No, absolutely not.
I wanted to ask, and I mean, I don't want to get you into trouble, but I do want to ask, if you look at your journey, so your business has been a stellar success.
Thank you.
And government keeps saying it's going to be doing all sorts of things to help small business. If you were in government, if you were the Minister of Small Business Development, what would you do to help small business? Is there one or two things that you can think of?
I think the first thing, Stephen, is that I would not look at businesses in South Africa with a tuck shop mentality.
Wow.
I would look at them as businesses that are able to scale, as businesses that are able to one day become multinational companies, and support from that mindset. And I think whatever advice we give right now, allocate money in this sense, and this is how you need to do, funding, it will not help until we change the mentality upon which we look at small businesses. And I think that there are many great ideas, many great businesses that are not given the opportunity that they deserve. I mean, when you look at businesses that go to, for instance, let's look at the trade show, which is the very low level where you can get assistance in government. They are not put on a scale where they can actually have their own stall and show their business as they are, but they group them together, no matter the industries, and you get lost in what you're looking at from these businesses from Africa. And I think it's a tuck shop mentality, and I have nothing against tuck shop, but that's my own terminology that I've termed it to say that let's start looking at them as potential companies that can be multinationals one day. We are contributing so much in terms of job employment today, small businesses. What more can we do if we get the real support? But I think having the right, outlook in terms of what we really stand for, and not just be taken as small business. And maybe we need to just change the name of small business, because I think that's where the mentality comes from.
So we've got literally 20 seconds. So we're thinking too small.
We are thinking way too small, because Most Crib is a business that is fantastically great, but has received very little support. Yep.
Michelle, thank you so much for coming in. I really do appreciate the time. Michelle Mokyr is the co-founder of Most Crib. It's an amazing story, and I suspect that there's a lot more to come from it.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud sponsor of the Absa Africa Financial Markets Index 2025.
Well, in the US, the bounce back continues from what Trump said over the weekend. First, of course, as you know, on Friday, he said he would impose tariffs of 100% on goods from China. Then over the weekend, he said, don't worry about China. We'll sort it all out. He said the Dow Jones now up 1.22%, the NASDAQ up 2%, the S&P 500 up 1.5% right now. One presumes that this is probably going to continue unless there are any other shocks through the rest of that trading session. But gold still above $4,000. I saw some suggestions today from Bank of America that they're pricing in gold at $5,000 an ounce. Really is, well, astonishing. We're back tomorrow. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.